All righty. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're logging in from. Welcome back to Tuesday Talks. I am just making sure that we are streaming everywhere we need to stream. There we go. All right. Welcome everybody to Tuesday Talks. So glad to see you. And we're gonna wait just a second here because I see people slowly logging in. Fantastic. And while we wait, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you all can see the QR code. So if for 如果今天需要中文翻译服务的话，可以扫这个二维码 for 小儿通. And then I always have the YouTube link up there just in case Zoom decides to pop out on you. So go ahead and grab that screenshot if you can. So if your Zoom dies, you can go ahead and try to get on YouTube as well. And if you type in the chat, I'll try to monitor that so that we can see the questions as well. And for anybody who is here on Zoom, go ahead and open up your chat box and open up your Q&A box if you'd like. And we are planning to use that, especially the chat this morning or evening. So please have that ready so that we can be engaged right away because we love to hear from you and we want to be able to know your questions and your thoughts so that we can fold it into our own conversation. And I always want to make sure to say thank you to all of our sponsor schools. We couldn't be doing Tuesday Talks without you. And we do Tuesday Talks because you keep asking us to. And so thank you for continuing to tell everybody about it and join us. And if you don't see the name of your school on this list and you want to have like the latest, then make sure to contact us because we'd love to have a conversation about how you can be one of the sponsor schools. So without further ado, this is kind of one of my favorite topics, obviously, because we do interviews here at Initial View and would love to talk a little bit more about it from the perspective of an admissions officer. And so I have the honor of introducing some great colleagues of mine. We've done lots of Tuesday Talks before together and some travel even. And so Clara, Sarah, and Natalie, if you all could take a minute and just introduce yourself and tell us a fun fact as well. Let's see, Sarah, you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Sarah Riggs. I work at Georgia Tech, specifically with our international students, international applicants, and we are really excited to talk a little bit more about interviews today. And a fun fact about me, I am really good at parallel parking. So I grew up in a city where you had to park that way and really good at that. So that's my fun fact, I think.
Awesome.
And I'll pass it over to Natalie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Gaynor. I'm an assistant dean of admissions at Swarthmore College, which is near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A fun fact about me is that I like to sew. Sometimes I sew my own work clothes, but I'm not wearing anything I made today.
Amazing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Clara Hoff. I'm an admission officer at the University of Virginia, and I work primarily with international students. Very happy to be speaking with you all today. I'm pretty small in stature, but I'm very good at free throws.
Oh, wow.
Basketball free throws.
I love this because I've like hung out with you all, and I always learn something new when I ask y'all to share a fun fact. And again, I always forget to introduce myself. My name is Gloria. I'm one of the co-founders of Initial View. And I'm running out of fun facts because I'm introducing myself every week. Let's see, today my fun fact is, well, I think I said this maybe in a session, but I didn't use it as my fun fact. The reason why I have a sibling is because my mother found me one day in front of a mirror talking to myself and like creating a conversation and a story. Maybe that's why I do initially, but I really, really I really wanted someone to engage with. So my mother was like, she needs to have siblings. So I have a sister and it's wonderful, but that might be a fun fact to add today to our conversation because we're going to be talking about interviews. So before we dive in, we want to know who you are. So I'm going to launch a poll real quick. And if you can see that, let us know who you are and where you are kind of in the process. And always takes a little bit minute to get people warmed up here, but it looks like maybe, okay, yay, half of you have participated. Keep going. And we have a good mix. We have, I think the majority of the students are applying this coming fall. So that's exciting. This is very, very relevant to you. And then we have a third of you are parents. We love having parents here. And there's 20%, almost a quarter of you are educators. So I'm assuming you're probably a counselor or a teacher. And love seeing a few rising juniors and a few rising sophomores, rising 10th graders as well. Always good. And I'm really glad you're here because I have always said that the way to get ready for an interview is to actually start earlier in asking yourself a question. So awesome. Thank you for participating in the poll and thank you for being here. And the next poll question I have is, have you ever participated in an interview? We'd love to know if you yourself have ever already participated in an interview, or if you're like, no, I've never done it before. I'm really, really nervous. Okay, so we're getting to about half of the people have said, oh, looks like a lot of you have already done some form of interview before. Like 75% of you have done an interview and a quarter of you have not done one yet. And that probably is because if you're younger, you might not have. Fantastic. Well, great. Well, that means that all of you already know a little bit of what it might be like. And so we're going to go ahead and start with the first chat question, which is, what words pop into your head when you hear the word interview? So go ahead and open your chat box. And I'm going to ask my admissions officer friends too, what are the first words that pop into your head when you hear the word interview?
You want us to say them out loud?
Yes, say them out loud.
I think for me, I think about when I hear interview, I think conversation.
That was my word too. Conversation, back and forth.
I'll add questions and answers.
Great. Anything else? Oh, I just realized that people couldn't type in the chat. Okay, can you type in the chat now, friends? Let's try again. Thank you for the person who raised their hand. Okay, go ahead and type in the chat. Always takes a minute. Scary, thank you, because I was gonna say that. I was gonna say scary was one of the first things that pop into my head, even though I do interviews. Even for me as an interviewer, there's that moment of like nerves, conversations, questions, answers, insights, communication, serious, okay, opportunity to learn about the personality of a person, interaction with a stranger, formal, communicate, spotlight time. Great. Who am I? These are great. And I was hoping that we would get these kinds of words because you probably have a lot of different words that come to mind when you think interview. I like that somebody said formal because a lot of times the word interview has a connotation with, like a job interview. You got to be more formal. You have to be serious. Somebody else said serious. So great. Well, if you were, because today we're going to talk specifically about interviews for college. We will touch on how they're similar and different to other interviews that you maybe have already done or will be doing in the future. but we're going to be talking about them in the context of admissions. So if you were an admissions officer, why would you want to conduct an interview? And some of you already said this in your earlier, like somebody said it's an opportunity to learn about the personality of a person. What else? And I'm going to have the admissions officers hold off because they're going to tell you why they could or would want to conduct an interview. To understand how people approach a problem in real time, great. To learn more about the students. Yeah. Think about your job as an admissions officer, what you would be needing to do. And in a minute here, I'm going to ask the admissions officers what their job is like. I would want to conduct an interview to know the student beyond paper, yeah, and the way they talk and communicate through words, gestures, and body language. So, to learn more about personal experiences, hobbies, to know if they're suitable for the college through a face-to-face conversation, know someone well and find something not in paper. And somebody said, so that I can have that last box ticked before I give the decision. These are great. What do you think, friends? Should we hire them to be admissions officers? Well, so Sarah, Clara, and Natalie, tell us a little bit about what your life is like as an admissions officer, particularly when you're, reviewing applications, I guess. Because I know your job includes other things than other than reviewing applications, but maybe, I guess you can describe a little bit what your job is like. Anyone want to start?
We can start. So at Swarthmore, we practice holistic admission. Oh, sorry. Did I just?
There you are.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, at Swarthmore, we practice something called holistic admissions, which essentially means that we try to understand all of the application materials that you provide to us within the context of wherever you're coming from. Part of what we do is called committee-based evaluation, which essentially means that we always read your application alongside a partner. We're never going to read any application alone. And we talk about what we're seeing in your application as we go through it. And so this is a really great way for us to catch every single thing in your application and to provide multiple different perspectives on all of your various application materials. Should I talk about how this relates to interviews, or should I hold off on that?
Well, maybe Clara and Sarah can tell a little bit as well what their jobs are like.
Go ahead, Clara.
Yeah, we spend a significant amount of time in application review. It's several months out of the year, and we have multiple people looking at every application. It's not always at the same time at UVA, but different sets of eyes so that we can get different perspectives and opinions before making a final decision. And then we'll have a committee review process at the end, especially to go over applications that may be a little bit more complicated for us in one way or another, where we really do want to have multiple people weigh in. And academics are really at the foundation of what we're looking for. It's going to be the first thing and the last thing that we're looking at, but we also want to know who you are as a person and what you would bring to our universities as a student.
Yeah, and I'll just talk very, very similar to Clara and Natalie here. I just want to paint a picture of kind of what that logistically looks like in our lives day to day. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of applications that we're meant to read every year. Each individual person is reading thousands of applications. You can imagine what our whole team is reading. And so we'll come in the mornings during review cycle and just open up a list. And we look at a list of students coming from a particular high school, coming from a particular country, coming from a particular academic curriculum, coming for a specific academic program or major, and really start to decipher through those applications on paper, in a lot of cases, how's a student doing academically? What's a student doing outside of the classroom? And reading those essays, reading personal statements. And so what we're doing is spending a lot of time with eyes on a screen, reading words instead of hearing words, right? So I think we'll get to why interviews are so important, how they can impact the process. But really, every day, almost all day long, we are eyes on a screen, looking at words, looking at writing, looking at lists of courses and transcripts, getting to know and understand high schools that you're coming from, getting to know and understand country context, getting to know and understand individual personal backgrounds, and then individual personalities as they're written on paper, right? So many of you have already captured that in kind of your chats, that maybe interviews help bring you off of paper, but we're spending a lot of time looking at a computer, reading words, trying to differentiate among students based on paper or screen, digital, but on paper applications.
Yeah, great. Well, I actually am going to stop sharing the screen in a minute because I think I love it when people can see our faces a little bit better. But just for context, I know, Natalie, you were going to start talking a little bit about how the interview fits in the holistic process, but the puzzle is one kind of way to show it. I also have this slate screenshot, which is a lot of schools read within a software. And so the way that initial view interviews work is it's a tab inside. And so it's accessible on the screen, as Sarah was saying, you know, the screen of essay, screen of transcript, but also there's a screen of interview potentially that people can play and listen in, you know, separately or listen in the background while they're reviewing your whole application. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second just so we can see your faces. And Natalie, did you want to start off and talk a little bit about a little bit more how the interview fits into maybe your process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of it relates to some of what Sarah already brought up. We read a lot on paper, and watching an initial view interview or hearing about how a student talks to someone in an interview really helps us have a more vivid picture of who they are as a person and how they might fit into our community at Swarthmore. So a lot of this has already come up in the chat as well. This idea that students can jump off the page when they're in an interview. You can see how a student's eyes light up when they talk about something that really excites them, something they're genuinely curious about. And those are all qualities that we really value in our review process. And so seeing those come to life in the interview can be incredibly helpful.
So, Sarah, you mentioned a few things when you were talking about not only are you, I mean, Claire, you talked about academics are the foundation. So you're definitely like the transcript, any test scores, so those things are kind of at the crux of like, are you going to be able to be successful on our campuses? But you also talked about some other variables that you're thinking about, like context of country and other things like that. And so curious for all of you, like, let's talk a little bit about how the interview helps with those other variables. Because I think a lot of people are just assuming, well, the interview just helps you understand my personality. But there's probably some other things that you might catch from even 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds of an interview versus like the whole 15 minutes. So what are this is a question for all three of you, like what are some things that a student might not expect could come out of an interview, but might actually inform the way that you're looking at the applicant?
I think one thing the interview does is it just gives you more time. Common App is very dry. You can list up to 10 activities. There's always a word limit for the description you can list there. So it's something that we value and that we are going to be looking at. But with the interview itself, you really get to expand on what you're interested in and what you're involved in. And something the initial view interviewers do is ask follow-up questions. So if there's something that you maybe didn't explain fully or flesh out, they'll ask you a follow-up question to allow you to tell us more information. And that can be really helpful on our end to get more context and to fully understand what you've been involved in and why it's important to you.
Yeah, and a couple of words that came up in chat earlier when we were asking, what do you think of when you think of an interview? Things like scary and formal and nervous. I understand why you're feeling those ways. We do, we definitely do. But sometimes a really successful interview is one where we learn not only a student's personality or more about their interests, but just the ease with which they are able to communicate, right? We're not, when I say communicate, I don't mean, do you use English perfectly? Do you never make a grammatical error? That's not what I'm talking about. But imagining you on our college campus, imagining you in our community, thinking about where we see you fit in on our campus community and how we see you move and navigate and communicate across our campus. So this idea of a relaxed conversation, relaxed communication really is probably more important than anything super formal in this particular setting. And so what we're looking for are little bits of insight along the way to, one, make sure that, yes, you're ready to be successful on our campus in terms of English proficiency, but that doesn't mean that that it's perfect conversation or stilted or even super formal, buttoned up conversation. We want to see how you might actually talk to professors, how you might actually talk with your peers, with others in student organizations, with the support systems you have around our campus. We want to see really kind of, as Clara was saying, what makes your eyes light up? What makes you excited? And then how are you easily talking about those things? And that helps us imagine where you might fit in our campus communities. And we're able to see that in a much clearer picture off of the page, really in practice in front of us. All we can do is imagine that when we're reading your application if we don't have an interview, but we really get to see it in practice when you submit that interview to us.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about pitfalls. And like when you feel like someone is trying very hard to use an interview in the wrong way, or and I think of this, Sarah, because what you're saying about this whole like buttoned up conversation where you're like trying really hard, maybe you've memorized some things, maybe you've scripted out some things, and it's just not natural. I know for when people ask me at an initial view, like, what's the biggest mistake you see? And I'm like, oh, it's when people try to memorize something because it doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel, in fact, sometimes it's like, I don't think you talk like this normally. I think it's not any different than maybe curating an essay and having spent lots of time editing, re-editing, that you kind of lost your voice. That happens in interviews as well. So, but what are some other pitfalls that you have either seen or heard or
Yeah, I think along those lines, Gloria, when a student comes into the interview with an agenda, with like, these are the topics I want to discuss in my interview, even if they haven't memorized it. But almost every answer to every single question seems to point back to this thing that a student really wanted to talk about, not because it's an appropriate answer to the question, but because you can tell it was on their agenda to talk about this item. That I would say If you have one or two things that are really, really, really important that you want to communicate across to someone who'll be reviewing your interview in that interview, everyone gets a chance at the end of an interview to address one thing that wasn't covered, right? Like if there was something you really wanted to say that wasn't covered today, you get the chance to do that. So know that that is coming if what you want to talk about isn't naturally brought up in the interview. The best interviews are ones where you can tell a student didn't go in with an agenda, because this isn't necessarily a formal back and forth. It's much more of a conversation, a question and answer. This answer prompts a new question, dive deeper into something. So I think a pitfall is to say, like, these are the things I want to talk about, and I don't want to talk about anything else. I specifically want to address these points in my interview.
I agree with that. I think there's often an urge to sort of use an interview as a way to rehash your accomplishments or your extracurricular list. Trust that we have that information in the application itself, and the interview is really precious time to maybe talk about some of the items on that list, but really focus on why they excite you, show why they're important to you rather than displaying those achievements to us. We already have that information. We already are really impressed by all of your many achievements. And so the interview is really a time to use your own voice and show us a little bit more beyond what's on paper.
Yeah, that's definitely another pitfall that I see a lot, where people just kind of want to list the things that they already listed on their application and not give a lot of detail. And I think, like, the more specific you can get, the easier it is for an interviewer to go deeper. Because if you only give that top line, I'm in MUN, then the interviewer is only left with like, oh, okay, well, why do you, or what's in, they only have that a very shallow second tier question to ask you. But if you're able to give a little bit more color on MUN and why it's important to you right from the get-go, they're able to like go a little bit deeper and then bring out some piece that wasn't evident in the 150 characters on, your application. So that's a really good reminder. Well, I want to share my screen again and ask you all a question. What do you want admissions officers to know about you? Students that are on this call, like what, we talk about, like, we're talking kind of a little bit broadly about things that can add to what your application already tells, but what are the things that you want admissions officers to know about you? Don't be shy. What are some unique experiences that I have outside of school? Yeah, background. Characteristics, okay. Admissions officers, these are good for you to know because maybe you can inform your office like how to change the supplements and things like that. And what do students want you to know? What else, friends? Great. So yeah, subjects that I enjoy, like things in my brain that make me have varying perspectives. These are great. So these are like the things that you want admissions officers to know are a little bit what we call intangible, right? They're not as, like we have the things obviously that are already currently in the process of the application. But, things that the spirit of adventure, the spirit of, like excitement, critical thought, like these are hard to describe on what's currently on in the admissions process. So I recently asked some people of what are some of these intangible skills that are ultimately important for success, whether that be college success, first year success, but also work success, things like that. So these are some of the words that came out that people are saying these, what we call soft skills, or at Initial View, we like to call them sapient skills, skills that make us human. These are some of the ones that came up. Would love for you all to add some words in the chat that you think make someone successful. Like, even you can think about it in the high school context. People that are in your clubs, or people that are in your classes. Like, what kinds of soft skills do they have that make it where, oh yeah, like I want to be a teammate with them, or I can see them starting something cool, or I can see them doing great research. Like, what are some of those characteristics? Anybody want to try to add? I mean, these are pretty good. And while we're waiting for people to add words, Clara, Sarah, and Natalie, do you have thoughts on some of these words, and maybe some of the words that are coming in, like how you would see that in an application, how you could potentially hear that? Because we don't necessarily want people to come in and say, like, I'm very good at critical thinking. Like, that's not the way that you realize that somebody is really good at critical thinking. So what are some examples? Maybe you can think back on some of the students or interviews you've heard before. How do you get at some of these?
Gloria, you mentioned specific examples earlier, and I think we often see these things through stories that students share, anecdotes. Again, not saying these are the exact skills that I showed, but maybe you were in a robotics competition and something went wrong with your robot and you had to adapt to a new situation and you had to collaborate with your group members. Maybe you showed leadership through that. So we learn a lot about you and your soft skills just through those stories that you share with us.
I think I see a lot of these qualities come up when I hear students talk about how they interact with their peers. Things like collaboration and critical thinking. I love it when students talk about disagreeing with a classmate and how the conversation went to work through their differing opinions. I think that's a great example of communication, collaboration, and critical thinking. I see initiative a lot from students whenever they talk about how they problem solve. So, I didn't get into the class that I wanted, and so I took the initiative to talk to my counselor about it, things like that. So I think, just as Clara mentioned, they come up in more ways that we can count in the stories that you tell us. And we might see these qualities even in stories that you don't think that you're displaying them in.
Yeah, and I think this is maybe a good time to talk a little bit about this idea, and I think we'll talk about it later as well, but this idea of institutional fit, right? So we're thinking about what are the personalities of each of our institutions, and what are some of the things that would make a student successful on our individual campuses. And that's not to say you should tailor your interview to any of these campuses, but what are we picking out in your interview that authentically makes you a good fit for our community? For instance, at Georgia Tech, I'm seeing some words here that are probably really lead to point to kind of what our community is and what our environment is, with this idea of initiative and impact and collaboration. We may see things like innovation or creativity and problem solving in your interview as well. These are all things that you can share by just telling a story, as Natalie was mentioning, telling a story, and we're going to say, wow, that experience really required innovation of that student, or creativity in problem solving with that student. And that may make them a really, really good fit for our community. So just telling your authentic stories, we're going to pick out what is most important to any of our individual institutions as well.
So some people are like, some of these new chat messages include creativity, respect, perseverance, diversity has come up a couple times. Can you guys speak to like I think community, this concept of community, and like when you're trying to build a class, what are you thinking about with regards to your community?
Yeah, at UVA, we always say there is no one type of UVA student. So we're really looking to have a community of students with different academic interests, with different backgrounds, who bring different perspectives to UVA. So there's not one single thing that we're looking for in an application. But I will say we do have some shared values as a university. We have our honor code. We also have something called student self-governance, which is the idea that students have the power to create change and students move the university forward. So we do notice a sense of initiative. We notice when you're thinking about a community bigger than yourself. And that stands out, but that can look different for everyone. It doesn't have to be formal leadership positions. It's thinking about your classmates and your team members and your neighbors and your community as a whole, and how you can make a positive impact in that way.
And when we're building a community, or when you're joining a community, it is important to us that it is as diverse as possible. And we mean that in every sense of the word, right? We are interested in a class of students who are coming from different parts of the world, but also more on a personal level have individual interests, whether that's academic interests or interests outside of the classroom, to make sure that our campus communities really are able to teach something to everyone, that you're not just learning from people who have the same exact interests as you, but that you're learning from people in this university setting who have different experiences, different interests, and that you're able to move across those groups as well through your ability to communicate, collaborate, etc., so on and so forth, and really take advantage of those communities as well. You're contributing and benefiting from those communities while you're on our campus. So we're looking for, I think, an eagerness and a willingness for you to be involved meaningfully in a community on our campuses. And we're gleaning some of those attributes, that eagerness to engage, through your communication with us in your interview as well.
Yeah, I echo everything that Clara and Sarah mentioned. I'll add that working at a small residential campus, we do really highly value how students will live and connect with one another in our campus spaces. So something we lift up in our process is what we call kindness and generosity towards others. So just kindness. How do you treat your peers? Do you look out for them? Do you support them when they're going through a tough time? That's something we really highly value in our admissions process. And I think it's something that students often possess, but don't think of it as an asset in the application process. But it's really important seeing how you interact with your peers and how you'll bring that into college spaces.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I think, one, I will never forget this happened a few years ago, but in an initial view interview, there was a student who had really over prepared for the interview, in the sense that he had some things he really, really wanted to say, just like Sarah said earlier, like had an agenda in the interview. And our interviewers really want to create some kind of environment where there's a back and forth, there's some engagement. And so the interviewer had gently interrupted the student because she realized that the student was sort of going down this monologue. and he responded with, "I'm not finished," in kind of a tone that I don't think he recognized was a little rude. I think it was mostly that he was so nervous and so fixated on what he wanted to say, but it came across not great. And he did it several times. And every time I share this story with a group of students, you hear this collective gasp, like, like knowing that that wasn't really the right way to handle it. Then I get like you know, sometimes you're nervous and but it is something kind of like that's the thing that stuck. I don't even remember what he was talking about, like in the whole interview. Like what was memorable in my brain was that he wasn't able to kind of gauge that the interviewer was being nice and trying to help him, and then he also could have approached it a little bit more gently and differently. And so sometimes it's just those like little nuances that speak a little louder, because I mean, this student actually, the way I found out about this interview is because an admissions officer actually shared it back to me and said, I normally, not because of an interview, decide that I don't want a student. Like he was like, more often than not, it's like it's just verifying, it's giving me more confidence in my decision. He's like, this student, like in my mind, was like making it so that I was like, I don't want him to be a roommate. I don't want him to be in an office hour. I don't want that. And it's a kind of an extreme example, but it's an example that I like to share because I don't want students to get so scared and so nervous and so fixated on what they think they need to say that they've kind of lost their ability to be just a great student and a kind person and a generous person, and someone that, and I think that most institutions, I mean, you have a few cutthroat institutions that might not care as much about that, but I think that we're in a place in the world where higher ed generally and universities generally would like to have somebody who's going to be kind and collaborative, so that they can really learn with and from each other. Anything to add in terms of some of these thoughts?
I think this is not exactly about kind of these traits, but one thing I always encourage students to do before they begin their application process is to literally make a list with pen and paper or on a computer, a list of everything that is important for us to know about you, that you would want to tell us if you were having a conversation where you had an agenda, right? What are all those things you would want us to know about you? And as you think about your application and what you're going to share in each part of the application, just start to cross things off the list. You want us to know that you're academically prepared. We're going to see your transcripts. We're going to see what classes you're taking and what grades you're getting. You can cross that off the list. You want us to know that you're involved in these organizations and your impact has been X, Y, or Z. Well, you're going to list that in your activities section. We want to know, or you want us to know, that you are in a family where you take care of major responsibilities. You take care of a parent or a grandparent or a sibling, right? We just want you to think about everything you'd like to share with us if you had an agenda, and then cross it off as you know that you're going to share that with us somewhere in your application. And if there is one thing that you're still just dying for us to know that isn't included somewhere else in your application, you can hold on to that item and make sure that you share it with us in that last question where an interview says, is there anything else you want to share with us? I tell you all of that because I think it helps in freeing up some of that anxiety about, like, well, are you really going to know who I am? Are you really going to know who I am if I can't go into the interview and say exactly what I want to say to you? Or are you really going to know who I am if I can't go to my application and just write an essay that says, I am so-and-so, I live so-and-so, and these are the 3 things that are important about me, right? There are places and spaces in this process for us to get to know you. And what we want to get to know about you in an interview isn't necessarily a list of those things. It's how are you navigating the spaces that you're in? Not what spaces are you in, but how are you communicating when you're in an activity or when you're in a classroom? Why is something important to you, not what is important to you, right? And so I think that is an exercise that may give you a little bit of freedom and may help you relax in this process when you understand, okay, these are the ways that I'm going to share everything I want someone to know about me. It allows you to just sit back and really execute in each of those spaces instead of white knuckling your way through or really holding on to everything that you want us to know, and try in each space of the application to really communicate that directly to us. It allows you to, I think, spread that out a little bit and communicate more effectively to us in each spaces of the application as well.
Yeah, and becoming a compelling communicator is such an important skill, for the rest of your life. And when we say compelling communicator, we don't mean like, oh, you're a great public speaker and you're very eloquent. That's not necessarily what makes a compelling communicator. A compelling communicator could be a person with few words, but is able to get the heart of what matters in a short amount of time in a clear manner. And I think that's something that we don't necessarily know how to teach, but it takes reflection, it takes working on, it takes like asking yourself the questions like, what do I actually want to communicate here? And how have I communicated elsewhere? And how do I present the information without just kind of listing it? Well, I want to make sure we have time for questions that students might have. So students, if you have questions, please go ahead and ask them now. I wanted to touch really quickly on how a college interview is different than some other interviews that students may have already done or will be doing in the future, like a job interview per se, and maybe how they're similar to them. So any thoughts on how to approach this differently? We've already kind of talked a little bit about how the context makes it different, but any other kind of tips or thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the big words that we tossed out earlier, conversation. A college interview is more of a conversation to learn more about you, what you're involved in, what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, and not necessarily ticking off certain skills that a job interview might be looking for. The other thing I'd say is that it's okay to be nervous. It's normal to be nervous going into an interview, whether it's for college or for a job. We understand that, but we don't want it to keep you from doing an interview or from submitting an interview, because what I often see, at least, is students will be nervous for the first question or two, and then they'll get comfortable. And then they're a little bit more confident with each question. And once you really get to talk about something that you're passionate about and that you care about, it doesn't feel like an interview. It doesn't feel as formal. Another word that came up earlier is you might think. And the questions are usually open-ended enough that you can answer them in many different ways. So you can find a way to answer the questions that's relevant to your life.
Yeah, I think I would say, there are some people who ask us, are you going to ask us really hard academic questions? And we're not going to come in and be like, tell us, explain, differential equations, like really, because we're not math people. But there is an opportunity to showcase your chops a little bit without, without being like a test. And so I think there is this thing of like this delicate balance of like, yes, you're not coming in and showing me all of your academic achievements in this interview, but there are opportunities where you could show that like, yeah, not only do I love math, I'm really good at it. And here's why. And like, this is why I really want to engage with somebody else who knows what they're talking about. But I can also dumb it down a little bit for you who might not understand. Like those are all very interesting, like small nuances that I think are unique to college interviews, but maybe not. You know, when you're applying for a job, you're also going to be needing to showcase your ability to learn on your feet, your ability to maybe like, if you're getting a computer science job, you'll probably have to choose some kind of test along with it. But there's a way that initial interviewer for your job is not necessarily wanting to do the technical interview right away, but they want to know that the technical interview is not going to throw you off. They're like trying to get a little bit where, so I think if you can approach a college interview that way too, yes, it's a conversation. But if you can show a little bit of like how my A's on this paper actually are A's, you know, like they're actually, you know, they, I didn't kind of like squeeze my way into an A. Like they're A's because I have all this like intellectual curiosity and ability to dive into the material and go deep. So these are some things that I feel like maybe maybe are unique a little bit to college admissions, where you're trying to figure out how to make the rest of your application, you know, come to life. It's confirming what's on the paper. Whereas sometimes when a job interview, you only have a little resume and you don't have all those other pieces yet.
Yeah. I would also just want to highlight that there are various forms of college admission interviews too. And what I would encourage is to think about the purpose of any interview that you're entering into. What is the goal and what is the purpose? An initial view interview is something that you're adding to your application to any college or university, that is to show off a little bit more about who you are, your communication style, your interests, etc. If you, though, are having an institutional specific interview or a academic field of subject interview specifically, that might serve a different purpose or different goal. I think probably Natalie, you're the only one on the call who does or has like alumni interviews or institutional specific interviews. Would you want to speak about that? Because I certainly can't, because I don't have those kinds of interviews at Georgia Tech.
Sure. So at Swarthmore, there are a few different interview opportunities, and all of them are optional, and you can choose which type you would like to do. But there are some that are conducted by alumni of Swarthmore and some that are conducted by seniors, current seniors at Swarthmore, in addition to the initial view option. And I would say that a really exciting opportunity in those institution-specific interviews is that you get to ask questions too. So if you have the opportunity to do an institution-specific interview, I would recommend thinking about what you want to learn more about, whether it's in regard to a particular program, in regard to their community, and making sure that you get your questions answered as well. Because in that context, I think it feels a bit more like a two-way street. You're also getting to meet a member of their community and understand whether or not you relate to that person and can see yourself as a peer with them at that particular institution.
Okay, so there are a couple questions here from students. What are some highlights, some maybe memorable interviews for you that you think other students could learn from?
Honestly, the most memorable interviews to me are ones where the student is so authentic to who they are. It's not pre-planned, it's a great conversation. I've seen a student sing in an interview to demonstrate a particular interest in music or to demonstrate a particular passion they had for musical theater, right? That's not saying that all of you should go into your interview and sing, but just a really great opportunity for you to really highlight your interest in a meaningful or more personable, in your, like, you can physically see and experience that, what that's like for that student. really makes a memorable interview. I'll never forget, and Gloria, you'll know this well. This is an example, I think, on your website for so long. In one interview, a student had talked a lot about a particular book, about Moby Dick, right? And in that conversation, that student was really talking about kind of the plot of the story, about why that book had been interesting to them. And then the interviewer asked, well, what's your own personal white whale? So relating his own life to this book. And he was able to say, you mean besides girls? So just be able to see really kind of, he was making a joke. It was really funny, but he also understood this academic topic that he had kind of brought up, this evaluation of the book. So just that little exchange always sticks with me. A student singing, a student who's so passionate about robotics or bugs. I know there's an example of that bug interview, Gloria.
Yes.
Those are highlights that stick out to me.
Claire and Natalie, do you all have any highlights or memories or things that stick out to you about student interviews?
I was looking at a few interviews last week and I realized that they are a real time capsule almost of a certain moment in time. There was one student who was a boarding student in the UK, and she talked about how she wanted the Queen of England to visit her school. And this was last August. And I was like, wow, like it really captures a certain moment in time where I think if we had seen it in August, it would be a good interview, but now it's a good interview and a time capsule. I've seen a few like that recently that have been fun to look back on.
Yeah, I think the things that stand out to me most are what Sarah mentioned, just that authentic excitement about a particular thing and the ability to talk in depth about it. It's really fun getting to see students get excited. Even if it's something that I know nothing about, a lot of the times I actually learn something new in interviews from someone who's interested in something completely different from me. So they're really fun learning opportunities, even just broadly outside of learning about a student. It's just great to see what you all get excited about.
Yeah, and there's this question of what are some interesting techniques that students could use when preparing for interviews. And, in listening to this, I think a lot of times when people are preparing, they really want to know what the questions are going to be so that they can prepare the answers. And I think that's probably not the technique because if you do that, then you kind of are pigeonholing yourself into saying something that's not so authentic. And it's not so, that one example from Moby Dick, we all love it because it was so off the cuff. It was so unexpected. And he just was like, besides girls, it just was like he wasn't trying to be somebody other than him. And that is, at the end of the day, I think what you want to present who you are authentically. And so if you want to prepare, one of the interesting techniques that I would say is have a conversation with a friend. And what I call it is play the follow-up question game. So basically just have a conversation, ask a question, and then predict kind of with each other, well, what could a follow-up question be? That feels a little bit more like, oh, you can kind of think about how a topic of conversation could go in any direction. And then you kind of think about what feelings are elicited when we talk about. So for example, if you like math and the direction is what kind of math are you studying right now? Okay. Or have you participated in any math competitions? Okay. There's directions where this might give me an opportunity to talk about the collaborative nature of this project I worked on, or this direction could make me think, could make me talk about the perseverance I needed to put in. And there's just all these directions you could go in. If you go that way, instead of just writing out what you think is a key moment of that memory, may just keep you in a box. But if you play this follow-up question game where you're like, okay, what else could they possibly ask? Or what would you ask me? Then you're going to be a lot more prepared with a lot of different stories and a lot of different perspectives. But don't write them all down. Maybe you can jot down a couple of notes, but then just throw out the pieces of paper. You don't need to write them down. You know your story, and then be natural about it.
Yeah, while I hate to say like the best preparation is no preparation at all, I do think that's true. I think the best preparation is just having some conversations before you go for the interview, whether that's with friends, whether that's with parents, whether that's with college counselors or teachers. Just having some conversations, and as much as you can in the English language, have some conversations just so that you're more comfortable with that piece of the puzzle and you're preparing that as you go in, so that when you're there, you're not concerned or thinking about language. Instead, you're concerned and thinking about like what's been asked of you and the conversation that you're having. So I almost encourage that the best preparation is no formal preparation for an interview. So we want you to be authentic and just have a conversation.
Yes, this is why I'm often like, you don't need to do it a second time, because the second time might not be as good as the first time. The first time you might feel you might have been the most natural and authentic. So, all right. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. And my guests have busy schedules ahead of them, but thank you so much, Clara, Natalie, and Sarah, for joining us today. And if anything resonated with you about when they talked a little bit about what was important to them as institutions, you should go reach out to them for their own virtual sessions and understanding a little bit more about their campuses. And I'm going to hang out for another 10 minutes in case somebody has an initial view specific question. I'm going to hang out and answer those questions. But in the meantime, Sarah, Clara, Natalie, thank you again for joining us. And we'll see you all next week. I think Sarah is going to be back next week for a fair about STEAM. And so come back next week if you're interested in studying something in the STEAM field. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Well, if anybody else has any questions, I'm going to hang out here for just a little longer. And you don't have to stay here if you've already heard me talk before or you got enough from the content. But if anyone else has any questions about interviews, preparing for interviews, I'm happy to stay on for a little longer. I will add, I think Sarah made a good point of like not over preparing. If you do want to prepare, my suggestion is self-reflection is the best preparation. You've got to really know yourself, because then you're not so worried about like coming up with the answer, and you're really just answering questions because you know who you are and you know your stories and you know what you like and you know where you're good at, and that's just going to come naturally no matter what question an interviewer asks. And yeah, the nice thing about technology now is that it's accessible to many of you to be able to record yourself talking to a friend. So if you want to get on FaceTime or WeChat or something and have a video call with a friend, that's a nice way to prepare, because there is something a little bit different when you're meeting someone in person and when you're meeting someone online. And so if you can get the lighting right and not worry about your microphone or your earphones, those kind of things are like very tangible preparation tips that I would say you could do. And also, if you record a conversation, you can watch it back and you can kind of see, oh, why was I looking off to the side so much? That the person's not there. Or you can think, oh, I don't actually have a lot of vocabulary for this subject, even though I love it. But for some reason, I was stumbling or struggling with talking about economics or something like that. So being able to watch what you're doing is a great way to prepare. So if you have a counselor or you're a counselor on this call, I would say set up some time to do a selfie assessment that we have in our platform, which is just students recording answers to typed questions. And then there's the junior interview that you could do ahead of time, where the student gets to have the full experience of an initial view interview, but then feedback from an admissions officer. And I'll give you some feedback I recently heard from one of the admissions officers. She said, I wish that students would give us more details in that first answer to that first year question. What's one of your favorite subjects? I would love for them to actually say math is one of my favorite subjects because, and already give me like at least one reason, because then that allows me to go deeper. And I think I mentioned that in the session today, but I wanted to reiterate that because you don't want to give one word answers. And if that's the way that you kind of answer questions right now, 1 word, 2 word, 3 word answers, that you might want to spend time with a friend or a counselor working on, okay, I can actually give a little bit more of a more robust answer so that an admissions officer isn't just saying, okay, tell me a little bit more. We want to be able to actually dig deeper faster, because then you're able to get at those stories that indicate that you have made impact, that you take initiative, that you think critically, that you persevere, that you adapt. Those are the things that don't come out on the rest of the application as well. And those are your moments. Those are your opportunities. Any other questions? Just double checking on the other platforms. All righty, well, I think unless somebody else has a last minute question, I'm going to go ahead and go for the day as well, as I'm on the road and going to travel to another conference. Thank you so much for joining me today, as you always do, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Take care, everyone.